Everybody keeps asking the same question right now. Why does Caitlin Clark's name somehow end up in the middle of every major controversy surrounding the WNBA? Seriously. Think about it. No matter what the original topic is, no matter who starts the argument, somehow the conversation always circles back to Caitlin Clark, her fans, her popularity, or the people who seem deeply uncomfortable with how massive she's become. And now it's happening again. This time, the backlash is centered around Indiana reporter Greg Doyle, a media figure who was already controversial long before this latest situation exploded online. But what shocked people wasn't just what he said. It was the fact that after everything that already happened in the past, he somehow walked directly into another firestorm involving Caitlin Clark and the audience surrounding her. And the reaction, instant. Fans weren't just annoyed. They were furious. Social media completely turned on Doyle within hours, with thousands of people accusing him of targeting the very fan base that helped transform the WNBA into one of the most talked-about sports leagues in America right now. Suddenly, what may have started as one article became something much bigger, a conversation about media bias, gatekeeping, favoritism, and whether certain people inside women's basketball resent the attention Caitlin Clark has brought to the sport. Because let's be honest, this no longer feels random. At some point, people stopped viewing these moments as isolated incidents. That's why the outrage this time hit differently. Fans started connecting dots. They remembered the awkward moments, the strange commentary, the repeated criticism aimed at Clark supporters specifically. And now many viewers are asking a question that the league itself probably doesn't want to answer publicly. Why do certain media personalities seem more focused on attacking Caitlin Clark's audience than covering the actual basketball? And that question opened a massive debate online. Some fans believe Clark's rise completely disrupted the old power structure around the WNBA. Others argue that longtime voices in sports media simply weren't prepared for the explosion of attention, money, and outside audiences she brought into the league almost overnight. And to be clear, a lot of this conversation is driven by speculation online. But the reason those rumors keep spreading is because moments like this continue happening again and again. What makes this situation even more dangerous is the timing. The WNBA is bigger than it has ever been. Ratings are up. Arenas are packed. National attention is exploding. And much of that momentum is directly tied to Caitlin Clark's arrival. So when a reporter connected to the Indiana Fever appears to take direct shots at Clark fans, people aren't viewing it as harmless commentary anymore. They see it as attacking the league's biggest growth engine. And the internet doesn't forget. Especially not now. Because the old days where reporters could control the narrative without pushback are disappearing fast. Fans clip everything. They repost everything. They compare patterns. And once public opinion turns, it spreads at lightning speed. But what really pushed this situation over the edge wasn't just the article itself. It was the growing belief that this may reveal something much deeper happening behind the scenes around Caitlin Clark and the media surrounding the WNBA. Greg Doyle's biggest problem right now isn't just the backlash. It's the fact that people already knew his name before this controversy even started. And not in a good way. Long before this latest explosion online, Doyle had already become one of the most polarizing media figures connected to the Indiana Fever because of that now infamous interaction with Caitlin Clark shortly after she entered the WNBA. The moment spread everywhere almost instantly. Fans called it awkward, uncomfortable, and completely inappropriate for a professional press setting. What made it worse was that it happened during one of the biggest moments of Clark's career, when all eyes were already on the Fever organization. Most reporters would have understood the warning signs after that. Doyle didn't. Instead of quietly rebuilding credibility, many fans believe he leaned even harder into the controversy surrounding Clark and the audience around her. And that's why this latest situation detonated so fast online. People weren't reacting to one article. They were reacting to what they viewed as a pattern. That distinction matters. Because if this had come from a random internet troll, the story probably dies in a day. But this wasn't some anonymous account farming engagement. This was a credentialed reporter with official access to the team, access that many independent creators and smaller journalists can't even get. That's what made fans so angry. They weren't just questioning Doyle anymore. They were questioning the system that continued giving him legitimacy after previous incidents already caused national headlines. And once those questions started spreading, things escalated quickly. People began asking why someone with Doyle's history still had courtside access around the league's most marketable player. Others pointed out that the Fever and the WNBA have been extremely vocal about online negativity surrounding players. Yet critics argue there seems to be far less urgency when controversial comments come from established media insiders. That double standard became a huge talking point, especially among content creators who cover the WNBA independently. Many of them feel there's an invisible hierarchy forming around league coverage. One set of rules for traditional reporters, another for outside voices. And while some of those frustrations are clearly emotional, the perception itself is becoming a growing problem for the league. Because once fans start believing certain insiders are protected no matter what they say, trust begins collapsing fast. What really amplified the outrage, though, was the feeling that Doyle never fully understood how much the landscape had changed around Caitlin Clark specifically. This isn't college basketball anymore. This isn't a niche sports story buried on page 6 of a newspaper. Every comment involving Clark gets dissected by millions of people in real time now. Every interview clip becomes social media ammunition. Every article gets screenshot, reposted, and debated across the internet within minutes. And the audience protecting Clark is massive, emotional, and incredibly online. That's the environment Doyle stepped back into. And many viewers believe he underestimated it completely. There's also another layer making this situation even more explosive: race. Not necessarily because Doyle explicitly framed everything racially himself, but because conversations around Caitlin Clark constantly drift into that territory online. Her popularity has sparked non-stop debates about media treatment, league marketing, fan demographics, and who gets celebrated in women's basketball. So anytime controversy appears around her now, those tensions immediately reignite. Fair or not, that's the reality surrounding her brand. And Greg Doyle walked directly into the center of it again. But what happened next made the backlash even worse, because fans stopped blaming just Doyle himself and started looking directly at the people who kept allowing him access in the first place. The moment Greg Doyle's article started circulating online, the reaction felt less like criticism and more like a full-scale revolt. Within hours, screenshots were everywhere. Fans were reposting quotes, creators were breaking down his language line by line, and entire comment sections turned into war zones. But what really pushed people over the edge was the feeling that the article wasn't trying to analyze basketball at all. To many readers, it felt personal. That's why the backlash exploded so fast. Fans weren't sitting there debating stats, coaching decisions, or on-court performance. Instead, they believed Doyle had gone after Caitlin Clark's supporters directly, the same supporters who packed arenas, drove television ratings through the roof, and helped turn regular season WNBA games into national events. And for a lot of people watching this unfold, the question became painfully simple. Why attack the very audience helping the league grow faster than ever before? That's where things got dangerous. Because whether people love Caitlin Clark or not, the numbers surrounding her impact are impossible to ignore. Ticket prices skyrocketed when she entered the league. Road games started selling out. Television networks suddenly cared about matchups they barely promoted before. Merchandise sales exploded. Even casual sports fans who had never watched a WNBA game before suddenly knew Indiana Fever scores. So when a reporter closely tied to that ecosystem appeared to criticize Clark's fan base, people didn't interpret it as harmless commentary. They saw it as biting the hand feeding the league's momentum. And online audiences are ruthless when they feel disrespected. Almost immediately, creators started bringing up old clips, old articles, and older controversies connected to Doyle. The internet basically put him on trial in real time. Some viewers argued that his comments reflected a deeper resentment toward the new audience Caitlin Clark brought into women's basketball. Others claimed this was part of a broader pattern where certain media personalities seemed uncomfortable with Clark becoming the face of the sport so quickly. To be fair, a lot of those claims are speculation. There's no public evidence of some coordinated effort against Clark fans. But perception matters online, and right now the perception is becoming a major issue. Especially because this situation touched a nerve that already existed. For months, debates have been building around the idea that parts of the basketball media world treat Clark's popularity differently than other stars. Supporters argue she receives unusually harsh criticism compared to the attention and success she brings. Critics push back and say her fan base overreacts to everything. But every new controversy just pours gasoline onto that divide. And Doyle's article landed right in the middle of it. What made the timing even worse was that many fans already believed tensions were rising between traditional WNBA coverage and the newer audiences flooding into the sport. Some longtime observers have openly criticized what they view as bandwagon Clark fans entering the space. Meanwhile, newer viewers feel dismissed, mocked, or treated like outsiders despite contributing heavily to the league's sudden popularity boom. That frustration has been simmering for months. This article made it boil over. And once fans began connecting the situation to larger conversations about media bias, favoritism, and gatekeeping, the story stopped being about one opinion piece entirely. Suddenly, people weren't just debating Greg Doyle anymore. They were questioning the entire culture surrounding who gets protected, who gets criticized, and who controls the narrative around Caitlin Clark. And that's exactly when attention shifted toward an even bigger controversy behind the scenes: how someone with Doyle's history still had official access to the team in the first place. The deeper this controversy went, the more people stopped focusing on Greg Doyle's words alone and started focusing on something much bigger. Who keeps giving him access? That question changed everything. Because in professional sports, media credentials aren't automatic. Teams and organizations decide who gets into locker rooms, who sits courtside, who attends press conferences, and who gets direct access to players. These passes carry influence. They create legitimacy. And once fans realized Doyle still held that level of access after previous controversies, the backlash expanded far beyond one article. Suddenly, people weren't just criticizing a reporter. They were questioning the entire system behind him. Fans started asking uncomfortable questions online. If the WNBA and the Indiana Fever claim to care about protecting players from toxic narratives, why does someone with Doyle's history still have front-row access around Caitlin Clark? Why are independent creators constantly scrutinized, while established media figures appear untouchable? And why does it feel like certain insiders keep receiving protection, no matter how many controversies follow them? Those questions spread fast because they tapped into frustrations that already existed. For years, many independent sports creators have argued that traditional media operates like an exclusive club. Connections matter. Relationships matter. Local ties matter. Meanwhile, newer voices trying to cover the league often struggle to gain access at all. So when fans see someone controversial continue receiving credentials while smaller creators get ignored, it reinforces the belief that the system favors insiders over fairness. And in today's internet culture, perceived unfairness becomes gasoline, especially around Caitlin Clark. Her arrival didn't just bring millions of new viewers into women's basketball. It also brought a massive wave of independent media attention. YouTubers, streamers, TikTok creators, podcasters, suddenly everyone wanted to cover the WNBA because Clark made the sport commercially relevant in a completely new way. That shift disrupted the old media ecosystem almost overnight. And some fans believe the tension is now boiling over publicly. Again, that remains speculation. But perception drives narratives online, and many viewers genuinely believe there's a growing divide between traditional WNBA media and the newer creator-driven audience following Clark. Doyle became the symbol of that frustration because he represented the old guard, credentialed, connected, institutionally protected. Meanwhile, many content creators feel they're treated as outsiders despite helping grow interest in the league. That resentment exploded during this controversy. Some creators openly pointed out the irony that social media users often get blamed for negativity surrounding the WNBA, while credentialed reporters can publish inflammatory commentary with far fewer consequences. Others argued that teams and leagues only crack down when criticism comes from outside their approved media circle. Whether that criticism is fully fair or not, the optics are terrible. Because every time Doyle's name trends, the spotlight shifts away from basketball itself and onto questions about favoritism, media politics, and institutional accountability. And that's the exact opposite of what the league wants during one of the most important growth periods in its history. The problem for the WNBA is that audiences today don't separate reporters from organizations the way they used to. If someone has official access, fans assume the organization is comfortable with them being there. Silence gets interpreted as approval. Lack of action becomes its own statement. And that perception is becoming harder for the league to manage. Because now the conversation isn't just about one controversial article anymore. It's about whether the WNBA accidentally created an environment where certain media figures feel protected enough to repeatedly target the league's biggest star and her fan base without consequences. And once that idea started spreading online, fans began noticing something else that made the situation even more explosive. Greg Doyle wasn't the only media personality being accused of this behavior. What started as frustration with Greg Doyle quickly turned into something far more uncomfortable for the WNBA, because fans began realizing this controversy didn't feel isolated at all. The deeper people looked, the more they started connecting names, articles, interviews, and commentary styles that all seemed to point toward the same pattern. And that's when the conversation shifted from one reporter to an entire media culture. Across social media, fans started bringing up other personalities they believed had taken subtle shots at Caitlin Clark's supporters over the past year. Some referenced dismissive comments about new fans. Others pointed to interviews or articles that seemed to frame Clark's popularity as a problem rather than a success story. Whether intentional or not, many viewers began feeling like there was growing hostility toward the audience Clark brought into the league. And once that perception takes hold online, it spreads fast. Now, to be fair, not every criticism of Caitlin Clark or her fan base is automatically unfair. That's important to say. Every superstar athlete attracts intense debate, especially one who exploded into mainstream fame as quickly as Clark did. Some longtime WNBA fans genuinely feel frustrated by how much media attention revolves around one player. Others argue that the league existed long before Clark arrived and deserves broader recognition beyond a single star. Those are valid conversations. But what turned this situation explosive is that many fans believe the criticism keeps crossing beyond basketball itself. That's the line people feel has been blurred repeatedly. Instead of debating Clark's defense, turnovers, or rookie adjustments, critics online argue that some media figures seem focused on minimizing her popularity, questioning her fan base, or framing her success as something suspicious or unhealthy for the sport. And because those moments keep happening publicly, supporters have started viewing them as part of a larger cultural divide inside women's basketball coverage. Some observers believe the tension comes from how dramatically Clark changed the media ecosystem around the league almost overnight. Before her arrival, WNBA coverage operated within a relatively small sports media bubble. The audiences were smaller. The attention was more niche. The same reporters, analysts, and commentators largely controlled the conversation surrounding the sport. Then suddenly, Caitlin Clark arrived and shattered that structure completely. The numbers changed instantly. TV ratings exploded. Arena attendance surged. Celebrities started showing up courtside. national sports shows that barely discussed the WNBA before suddenly centered entire segments around Clark. And with that came millions of brand new fans who didn't necessarily follow the old rules or care about the old hierarchies surrounding league coverage. That shift created tension. Some longtime media voices adapted quickly and embraced the growth. Others, at least according to critics online, seemed deeply uncomfortable with how much power and influence Clark's audience suddenly carried. And because social media amplifies every reaction in real time, even small comments can spiral into major controversies within hours. That's exactly what happened here. Fans started treating Doyle's article not as one bad opinion, but as evidence of a broader attitude they believe exists behind the scenes. Again, there's no proof of some organized effort against Clark. Much of this discussion lives entirely in speculation and public perception. But perception drives online culture now more than facts alone. And perception around WNBA media is becoming increasingly divided. On one side are people who believe journalists are simply pushing back against toxic fan behavior. On the other are viewers convinced certain insiders resent Caitlin Clark's popularity and the audience shift that came with it. The dangerous part for the league is that both sides now distrust each other completely. And once fans lose trust in the people covering the sport, every future controversy becomes 10 times bigger than it should have been in the first place. By the time Greg Doyle's article fully blew up online, fans weren't reacting to it like a one-time mistake anymore. They were reacting to what they believed was a repeating cycle. That's why the phrase patterns started showing up everywhere across social media. People began comparing clips, comparing headlines, comparing interviews. And the more they compared, the more suspicious they became. For a growing section of the audience, this no longer felt like random criticism aimed at Caitlin Clark or her supporters. Instead, many fans started believing there was a consistent tone coming from certain corners of WNBA media whenever Clark's popularity became the topic. Not necessarily direct attacks every time, but subtle dismissals, passive-aggressive commentary, or framing her fan base as the problem behind every controversy surrounding the league. That perception has become incredibly powerful online, especially because every new incident seems to revive older ones instantly. The moment Doyle trended, fans immediately started bringing up previous media figures they felt had crossed similar lines. Names from older controversies resurfaced. Clips from months ago suddenly went viral again. And in the internet era, once audiences start connecting separate incidents together, they create a narrative that becomes very difficult to stop. That's exactly what's happening now. Some viewers believe certain reporters have developed resentment toward the Caitlin Clark effect because her arrival disrupted the balance of attention inside the WNBA. Others argue the tension comes from frustration with portions of Clark's fan base that can become aggressive online whenever criticism appears. Both sides accuse the other of exaggerating. But here, the problem, every new controversy hardens those divisions even more. And social media algorithms thrive on conflict. The more emotional the debate becomes, the faster it spreads. That's why even relatively small comments involving Clark now turn into national sports discussions within hours. People aren't just debating basketball anymore. They're debating identity, fairness, race, media power, and who gets to shape the public image of the league moving forward. That's a massive shift from where the WNBA was just a few years ago. Many fans now feel like there are two completely different realities surrounding Caitlin Clark. In one reality, she's simply a superstar rookie attracting historic attention and helping grow the game. In the other, according to critics online, she's become a symbol in a much larger cultural argument that extends far beyond sports. And because of that, every media controversy surrounding her becomes emotionally charged almost immediately. What makes the situation even more volatile is that fans no longer trust traditional gatekeepers to control the conversation. Years ago, a newspaper article might dominate the narrative for days before pushback gained momentum. That world is gone now. Today, audiences respond instantly. Creators upload reaction videos within minutes. Twitter threads dissect every sentence. TikTok clips spread outrage faster than official reporting ever could. That means reporters are no longer speaking to passive audiences. They're speaking to millions of people ready to challenge everything publicly in real time. Greg Doyle became the latest example of what happens when that environment turns against someone. And whether the accusations against broader WNBA media are fully fair or not almost becomes secondary once public perception locks in. Because online audiences don't operate like courtrooms. They operate emotionally. Once people believe they're seeing a pattern, every future incident starts reinforcing that belief automatically. That's the position the league now finds itself trapped in. Not just defending one controversial article, but dealing with a growing portion of fans who genuinely believe there's an ongoing effort to minimize, control, or discredit the Caitlin Clark phenomenon itself. And if that perception keeps spreading, the consequences could reach far beyond social media outrage alone. What makes this entire situation so risky for the WNBA is that the league is finally experiencing the kind of mainstream momentum it spent decades fighting for. And now some fans feel like that momentum is being threatened from inside the house. That's the part people keep coming back to. The WNBA isn't operating in survival mode anymore. The attention is here. The ratings are here. Sponsorship money is growing. Celebrities are showing up courtside. Sports networks are dedicating real airtime to women's basketball. And whether people like hearing it or not, a huge portion of that explosion is tied directly to Caitlin Clark's arrival. That's simply reality. Which is why controversies like this feel so dangerous. Because every time a media figure connected to the league appears to attack Clark or her supporters, fans interpret it as self-sabotage. Instead of building around the momentum, they believe parts of the basketball world are fighting against it emotionally, politically, or culturally. And perception matters enormously in modern sports, especially when your audience is still growing. The problem for the WNBA is that new fans don't have long-term loyalty yet. A lot of viewers discovering the league through Caitlin Clark are casual fans. They're not emotionally attached to teams the way older fan bases are. They're attached to excitement, storylines, rivalries, personalities, and momentum. That means the league is still in a fragile stage where audience trust matters more than ever. If fans start feeling unwanted, mocked, or constantly blamed for controversy, some of them simply leave. That's the danger. And once audiences disappear, they don't always come back. Sports history is full of leagues and organizations that mishandled growth moments because internal politics got in the way. Instead of embracing new attention, gatekeepers tried controlling it. Instead of adapting to changing audiences, they resisted them. Some fans now fear the WNBA is drifting into that exact territory. Again, that's perception, not proven fact. But perception drives engagement. Right now, many viewers believe there's a disconnect between what the league says publicly and what fans experience online. On one hand, the WNBA celebrates record-breaking visibility and massive growth. On the other hand, critics argue that parts of the media ecosystem surrounding the league seem openly hostile toward the very audience fueling that growth. That contradiction keeps creating backlash. And social media amplifies every piece of it instantly. Years ago, leagues had much more control over public narratives. If controversy appeared, organizations could rely on traditional media cycles to eventually move on. That doesn't work anymore. Now, fan communities create their own ecosystems. Independent creators drive millions of views. Viral clips shape public opinion faster than official statements ever could. The audience has power now. That's the biggest shift happening here. Fans no longer passively consume sports coverage. They challenge it, dissect it, and organize around it in real time. And once they decide someone represents bias or disrespect, the pushback becomes relentless. Greg Doyle learned that firsthand. But the bigger issue is whether the WNBA fully understands how different the media environment has become around Caitlin Clark specifically. Because Clark isn't just another rookie. She's become the center of a cultural conversation far bigger than basketball itself. And that means every controversy tied to her carries higher stakes, bigger audiences, and far more emotional intensity than the league may be prepared for. What might once have been dismissed as just another media spat now turns into national debate overnight. That's why this situation matters long-term. Not because one reporter upset fans, but because it exposed how fragile the relationship between the league, the media, and this rapidly growing audience may actually be beneath the surface. And the biggest question now is whether the WNBA can adapt before those tensions become impossible to control. At this point, the biggest thing the sports world may be underestimating about Caitlin Clark is that she's no longer just a basketball player. She's become something much larger than that. And whether people inside the WNBA fully realize it or not, that changes the rules for everyone around her. Because once an athlete reaches a certain level of cultural influence, normal media dynamics stop working. That's exactly what seems to be happening here. Every controversy involving Clark now instantly becomes national conversation material. A single comment from a reporter turns into trending debates across Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, sports television, podcasts, everywhere. Fans dissect every angle. Critics respond. Supporters push back. And before the league can even react, millions of people are already arguing about it online. That kind of attention is rare. And it's incredibly difficult to control. For years, sports organizations operated under systems where traditional media helped shape the narrative surrounding players. Reporters had enormous influence over public perception because audiences had fewer ways to challenge them directly. But Caitlin Clark entered the league during a completely different era, one where fan communities are just as powerful as the institutions covering the sport. That changes everything. Now, if fans believe a player is being treated unfairly, they don't wait for official responses. They launch their own conversations instantly. They clip interviews. They analyze articles. They compare past comments. And because Clark's audience is so massive and emotionally invested, the response machine around her moves faster than most media personalities are prepared for. Greg Doyle just became the latest example of that reality. Many people believe he approached this situation like older controversies where criticism might spark temporary outrage before fading away. But the Clark audience doesn't operate that way. Her supporters are online constantly. They archive everything. And once they feel someone crossed a line, the backlash keeps snowballing because the internet never really lets these moments die anymore. That's why this controversy escalated so quickly. But there's another layer making this even more complicated for the WNBA. Caitlin Clark's popularity now reaches far outside traditional women's basketball audiences. She attracts casual sports fans, mainstream media attention, celebrity interest, political commentary, and culture war debates all at the same time. That means every discussion surrounding her immediately becomes bigger, louder, and more emotionally charged than a normal sports conversation. And some observers believe the league, still, hasn't fully adapted to that reality. Again, that's speculation. But fans online increasingly argue that certain media figures continue treating Clark like a typical rookie, instead of understanding. She's become the central figure in the league's modern identity, whether people are comfortable with that or not. That creates enormous tension. Because once a player becomes bigger than the systems surrounding them, controlling public perception becomes nearly impossible. The audience starts deciding narratives on its own. Traditional gatekeepers lose influence. Reporters no longer dominate the conversation. Social media communities do. And right now, Caitlin Clark's community may be one of the most powerful fan ecosystems in all of sports. That's why every attempt to criticize, minimize, or challenge her audience now creates explosive reactions. Fans interpret it as more than basketball commentary. They see it as an attack on the movement surrounding her entirely. Whether that reaction is always fair is debatable, but its power is undeniable. And that may be the biggest lesson from this entire Greg Doyle situation. The old playbook doesn't work anymore. The media environment around Caitlin Clark has fundamentally changed. The audience is too large, too connected, and too emotionally invested to be managed the way sports narratives once were. And the people who still haven't realized that are finding out the hard way in real time. What started as one controversial article has now turned into something much bigger than Greg Doyle himself. That's why this moment feels different from the endless sports drama people usually forget after a few days. The backlash surrounding this situation exposed a growing divide that has been building quietly around the WNBA for months, maybe even years. And now it's out in the open. Because at the center of all this isn't just a reporter or even Caitlin Clark alone. It's a battle over who gets to control the conversation around the fastest-growing star women's basketball has seen in decades. That's the real story people are reacting to. Fans no longer believe they have to sit quietly while traditional media figures shape narratives without resistance. That era is fading fast. The internet changed everything. Audiences now fight back instantly. They organize discussions in real time. They bring up old clips, old articles, old controversies, and once they decide there's a pattern, they don't let it go. That's exactly what happened here. Greg Doyle may have believed he was writing another opinion piece. Instead, he accidentally stepped into one of the most emotionally charged conversations in modern sports culture. A conversation involving race, media power, fan identity, league growth, and the massive cultural force Caitlin Clark has become almost overnight. And whether people agree with the backlash or not, one thing is impossible to ignore now. The audience surrounding Caitlin Clark is unlike anything the WNBA has ever experienced before. That changes the pressure on everybody. Reporters are under more scrutiny. Teams are under more scrutiny. The league itself is under more scrutiny. Every article, every interview, every comment gets analyzed at a level women's basketball simply never experienced before Clark entered the picture. And some people inside that ecosystem appear fully prepared for the new reality. Others still seem caught completely off guard by it. That disconnect is creating chaos. Because the WNBA is no longer operating in a small sports bubble where controversies fade quietly. Every issue now becomes national discussion material within hours. Every media mistake turns into viral content. Every perceived slight sparks debate across millions of screens instantly. And the league's biggest challenge moving forward may not actually be basketball at all. It may be trust. Trust between old fans and new fans. Trust between independent creators and traditional reporters. Trust between audiences and the institutions shaping coverage around the sport. Right now, that trust feels fragile. Some viewers believe Caitlin Clark is unfairly targeted because of how rapidly she changed the league. Others think portions of her fan base overreact to criticism. Both sides are deeply dug in, and every new controversy only widens the divide further. But regardless of where someone stands politically, culturally, or emotionally in these debates, there's one reality nobody can deny anymore. Caitlin Clark changed the power structure around women's basketball permanently. The audience is bigger now. The attention is louder now. And the consequences are heavier now. Greg Doyle's situation proved that in real time. Because this wasn't just another sports media controversy people scrolled past and forgot. For many fans, this became a symbol of something larger happening beneath the surface of the WNBA itself. A sign that the league is entering a completely new era where narratives can no longer be controlled the way they once were. And honestly, the biggest story in women's basketball right now might not even be what happens on the court anymore. It might be the fight over who gets to define the story surrounding Caitlin Clark in the first place. If you made it this far, you already know this story is far from over. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think this changes everything, or are people overreacting? Hit the like button if you enjoyed this breakdown. It really helps push videos like this out to more viewers. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next update, because things are moving fast and there's a lot more coming. I want to hear your take. Does this shift the balance, or will defenses find another way to respond? Share this video with someone who needs to see this, especially if they've been following this story closely. Turn on notifications so you're always the first to know when new content drops. If you've got a different perspective, drop it below. I read a lot of the comments and the discussions here are always interesting. Let me know what you think happens next, because this could go in a lot of directions. And if you enjoy content that breaks things down in a simple, engaging way, stick around. There's plenty more on the way. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.